about time to start. Before we do, Kyle, would you lead us in prayer?
Gracious, loving Father, we're so thankful for this opportunity to gather in your home, this house of prayer and worship, for this opportunity to study your word in classroom, and out here with the adults. We pray for all of us as students, dear Lord, that we listen with open minds and open hearts. Help us to be receptive to your truths, to your word. Help us, dear Lord, to take your word deep into our heart. Help us to serve our families. Help us to serve our churches. Help us to serve our communities. And dear Lord, we're so thankful for this opportunity for family. Help us always to recognize this special privilege that you give us to meet. That it's this special privilege to study your word and for this opportunity to gather as a classroom here. We're so thankful for all the teachers who prepared their material. We're so thankful for their time, for their diligence, their loving kindness to share with all of us. We pray, dear Lord, that you be with those of our family members who have those who are sick. We pray that you would be with them, and the doctors and the nurses watching over them. And for those traveling, dear Lord, that you would see them safely to their destinations. It's in Christ's name we pray.
Amen. Okay, so we are looking at the area of how foolish sons can do damage. Let's look again at 15:20. I think we may have looked at this, but let's look at it right now. 15:20, Proverbs 15:20.
A wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish man despises his mother.
So what we see is that our children have the power to make us joyful or miserable. You know, a wise son, can make a father glad, but a foolish man despises his mother and creates a lot of grief. If we knew how much grief and pain or joy and happiness our children would bring us if we raised them upright, it might give us more motivation to do a better job of really prioritizing how we raise them and trying to listen to the Lord. We'll see some things about that as we go on here in Proverbs, and it's certainly in our best interest to do everything we can to help our children be what they ought to be. Then look at 11:29. How foolish it is to trouble our own house. You see people in families that just are very harsh toward each other, very super critical, just really tear up their own family. It's kind of like, destroying your own place to live. It doesn't make much sense. Thoughts? So 27:8. So you see people who are kind of rootless. They sort of wander here, there, and yonder and never really put down any roots, never have really any attachment to anybody. And that's really foolish, to say the least. I mean, it may be one of those deals where, the grass is always greener on the other side. You think, well, if I go over here, if I go over there. But really, we're much better off sticking with something and putting down roots and staying than we are just flitting here, there, and yonder. Thoughts? Yeah, Terry.
One of the things I think about is that, if we're young, a young person would leave home early, look at all the stuff that they don't have when they're out there dealing with the world. And so that would be, to me, it'd be a worse situation than someone who would be a little older, so that, they'd be a little bit more wise about how things are.
Good thought. Yeah, I can see that. Other comments? Okay, so 17:21. Yeah. You see how much power the children have over the well-being of their parents, over their joy and their sorrow. It's really true. I mean, we again realize that it's only in our own best interest to do everything we can to help our children grow up to be faithful servants of God and be what they ought to be. Otherwise, they're going to bring us a lot of grief. 17:25.
A foolish son is a grief to his father, and bitterness to her who bore them.
He keeps saying that. He's got a lot of proverbs on that idea. You know, the children bring grief or joy to the parents so often. And then 1913.
The foolish son is destruction to his father, and the contentions of a wife are a constant difficulty.
So here, this is kind of a two-pronged proverb. Greatest sources of unhappiness in the home. You have the unhappiness in the home with a foolish son or with a contentious wife. You know, those are two things that can really disrupt and destroy a good home atmosphere. And comments or questions on that? We're going to move into talking about what we can learn about from foolish and wise wives. 1822.
He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord.
So who finds the wife? Does he or the Lord? Yeah, I think they're both involved. Yeah, aren't they? You know, you think about he who finds a wife finds a good thing, but obtains favor from the Lord. The Lord gave him the wife. He found the wife. You know, when we are blessed with finding a good wife, we ought to give credit to God. He's the one who engineered the process. He's the one who brought her into our, frame of vision or whatever. So it's a great blessing to have a good wife, and we ought to thank God for that and just really be appreciative of what God's done. 1914. Yeah, Marty.
I was wanting to say, when I met Eddie, he was a blind date.
Huh.
And it was on a Saturday night, and he asked me to come to church with him. And that's how I came to know the church and God in the right way.
Wow, that's cool.
So I thank God every time I see him.
If you have a good wife, good husband, thank God for them. I mean, there's a lot of people who are miserable because they're mismarried. And so it's a real blessing. Good thought. Thank you for sharing that. 1914.
House and wealth are an inheritance from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord.
Again, same idea. You know, the house and the wealth, you know, are an inheritance from the fathers, but a prudent wife just comes from God. You know, you have to appreciate what God's done in giving you a prudent wife. They're not easy to spot. They're not easy to find. There's many a man who thought he found one and finds to his grief later on that's not the case. So if we found a prudent wife, let's glorify God and praise him for that. It's a wonderful blessing. Thoughts? Nathan?
Not only do we realize that it is a blessing from God, but in comparing the two things in that verse, I put that as look how much more it's valuable than the wealth that's talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, you'd give up your wealth to have a contented home and to have happy wives. 21:9.
It is better to live in a corner of a roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman.
Can be unbearable. Better to expose oneself to nature up on the rooftop than to have to live with a wife who's hard to please and always complaining and frustrated. Dawn? Oh.
Well, I didn't have my hand up, but what I was thinking was, isn't it amazing that God has this in the Bible? You know,
Yeah.
sayings like that are so true when you wouldn't think that.
Yeah.
He's really wants us to understand.
You might not even think that this would always have been true, but, you know, people have not changed over thousands of years, Terry.
But one of the things he didn't say was put her away.
That's right. No, put her away is not an option. Austin.
Possibly what's the reason for the quarrel, right? You know, am I being the leader and the husband that I should be, or am I causing contention? Am I causing her grief that she's maybe not staying in her role, but which is not godly, but if I'm not being the godly leader, then I'm causing her to stumble.
Good point. It's true. We have an impact on that. Yeah, good thought. So he says better in the corner of a roof. Well, 21:19.
It is better to live in a desert land than with a quarrelsome and a fretful woman.
Sometimes the housetop is just too close. You know, being alone's better than living with her. Any discomfort, any deprivation is worth it to get away. again, that ought to back us up, as we train our children, for example, to teach them what an impact a wife or a husband has. And wow, don't marry one impulse. Really find out as much as you can, really think about it. She may be a great date, but what will she be like as a wife? And how's it going to be having to live with her? And same way for her with him, obviously. You want to submit to him? Will he be the kind of guy who would lead you in a way that you'd want to go? So, there's a lot of grief that comes from families. We're in our family, and we can't get away from them very easily, although he tries with the desert land. Thoughts, comments? 25-24. Again, better to be in some cramped quarter than in a spacious house with a woman like that. And then 27, verses 15 and 16.
Constant dripping on a day of steady rain, and a contentious woman are alike. He who would restrain her restrains the wind, and grasps oil with his right hand.
She nags. She's a nuisance. She just continues to pick and complain, and it just becomes so difficult. This is the first place I ever preached, so these people have long since died. There was an older man in the congregation, and I was not in the class. I was teaching downstairs. But somebody was teaching this and teaching the annoyance of the drip, 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 drip. It becomes all you can think about. And this guy in the congregation said, "Yeah, you get used to it." And I think he meant it totally seriously, knowing him. I don't think his wife liked it, but I suspect it was appropriate. But it's hard to get used to because it just is annoying. Dawn.
When it's been here so many times, I think, we need to pay attention to that, and we need to not be quarrelsome. We need to be careful.
Yes, definitely. We can change ourselves and make our family happier. We can be the kind of man or woman or child that would glorify God and that would make the family a more pleasant place. It's like we foul our own bed. Why would we do that? You have to live in the home. You might as well enjoy the people you're living with by treating them well and making a happy environment. So much better, so much easier. Some of these things are kind of no-brainers as far as, the logic of what we should do. And notice he said, he who would restrain her restrains the wind. How are you going to hold back the wind tonight, for example? And grasps oil with his right hand. You're going to pick up a handful of oil? It's about like trying to nail jelly to the wall. You can't do it. It won't work. You can't pick up the oil. You can't deal with a woman like that. Comments? Yeah, Austin.
And maybe in that point, right, this isn't something that you control by force. It's not something that you control by pressure and saying, you're going to do it my way, and you're going to stop nagging me. That this is as a man needs to be met with wisdom. It needs to be met with patience. There might be a reason that quarrelsome person is in your life, and you may be part of that reason.
Maybe you never do what she's asking you to. Yeah, that's a good point. That's certainly true. Jared.
I find it interesting, coming from Solomon, either he noticed this in other people or he experienced it. You'd think he wouldn't have put himself or surrounded himself in a situation, or not for very long at least, he could have the opportunity to do whatever he wanted to. I just find it interesting that he's got this level of experience or wisdom. Obviously it's given by God, but he noticed it or experienced it or lived it.
Yeah, he may have understood nagging wives way better than we do, with as many wives as he had. So yeah, that's a good point. Other thoughts? Terry.
When I look at all these things, and I think about my situation, I didn't have a lot of, when I was coming up, there was a lot said about these things we're looking at right here, right now, and I think, what a job we have to do put these things in the
Maybe we need to think, is she chronically dissatisfied with her parents? Is she chronically dissatisfied with the boss, with her coworkers, with the teacher and things like that? If she's always dissatisfied with everybody else around her, I bet she won't like you either. You know, that's the way you'd imagine it would go. We need to really realize the damage that's done and be very careful and thoughtful about who we choose to marry. Ed?
I have talked to young people and told them basically they need to do the research on the person they're planning to marry or whatever. Do some research, find out if they head over heels in debt, find out if they have been married before, of course. Things that you need to know. Have they been on a different job every month? You know, I think it's a good idea.
Maybe talk to people who know them well. What kind of relationship does she have with her parents, with her family? You know, and what about her friends? How do they see her really? And if you can get them to be more honest about that, it might open your eyes to some things you hadn't seen. Sometimes we get all excited about wanting to have a wife and we're not careful in our selection. That can really ruin us later on. Other thoughts? So 1913.
Foolish son is destruction to his father, and the contentions of a wife are constant dripping.
Yes, it'll just wear you down. It never lets up. Severely damages the house. So, you know, we're just seeing the same thing over and over and over. That constant annoyance that just drives you crazy. And 12:4.
An excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who shames him is like rottenness in the bones.
So it goes both ways. An excellent wife is the crown of her husband. We profoundly affect our spouse. We affect their happiness. We affect their status in society. You know, marriage can make or break someone. And, you know, much depends on what kind of woman she is. Is she an excellent wife, or is she one who shames him? Is she one who is always running him down, always saying negative things, critical things about him? She can really hurt his image in the sight of other people. You know, so it's just recognizing the great impact our relationships in our home have on us. I think that's what he's helping us see. And really good things to think about, good things to analyze in various ways. Take these principles and then apply them, use them in ways. Scott?
Notice the dripping, and I was thinking unwanted leak. Like, it's never a good thing.
Yeah.
A leak that's not supposed to be there. And the fact, to Miss Dawn's point, over and over and over again, I thought of the Apostle Paul. He really wants to beat something home, like he repeats himself in the same chapter sometimes, right? And again, I say, like, just thinking those.
Yeah. Yeah, this clearly is something that Solomon and the Lord thinks is important. He mentioned it quite a few times, so we get the point. And so we'd remember it. 14:1.
The wise woman builds her house, but the foolish tear it down with her own hands.
Yeah, here's the difference between a wise woman that builds up her house, that helps her family, the foolish woman that tears it down. There is so much influence that a wife and mother has in the home. So much influence. You know, it can change the direction of the home so much. A good wife and mother can do so much for her children, so much for her husband. It's such a blessing. And you've seen that. Think about people you know, good men you know, good children you know, and look at their wife, look at their mother. And a lot of times you'll see why they're good. And it's, you know, it makes you really stop and think, if you're a wife and a mother, what can you do to make your husband and children better? Thoughts and comments on wives here. Now we're going to talk about children and talk a lot about disciplining children. There's a lot that he says in Proverbs about that, and I think we need to think about this. 19:18. To say chasten or discipline your son while there's hope, to me implies that they get to the point where you can't do much. If the discipline is not applied early on, then it's probably not going to be useful. They're young and pliable when they're young, and they can learn to respect authority. When a child can still be shaped, you can discipline them to get them to learn to respect the authority that you have. Primary thing we're trying to do, we're trying to get them to lose their self-will and be willing to submit to those that God has put in authority. And so we discipline them to get them to do that. It is much easier not to discipline children in the short run. It's a nuisance. We have to take time. It disrupts things. They're going to cry. We're going to talk to them some more. We're going to hug them and explain why and all this kind of stuff. It's just ignore it. Just forget it. It's not doing anything bad. Well, you start ignoring those things and not disciplining, and you're not shaping the child when they're young so that they are wise and godly as they get older. So it's really important, this idea of discipline your son while there's hope, while he's still young enough to benefit by the discipline. Dawn.
He said in the short run, it's kind of hard, but in the long run, it's so much easier.
It is.
From the beginning, because then by the time, they're a very young age, then they're obedient.
Yes, it absolutely is. You know Kyle, and you know how stubborn he is in general. You can imagine what he was like as a child. And I spanked him a lot. I would almost always then pick him up and hug him and explain why and how much I loved him and what I was trying to do. And it took a long time for him to get the point. It's probably 4 or 5 before I was able to basically quit spanking him. And he did it. But then that was wonderful. Man, after that, it was great because I knew he'd do everything I told him to do. He was very compliant, still strong-willed, but he understood the authority that I had and that I was the one to set the standards. And it's worth it. It was a lot of work for a while and kind of hopeless, it seemed sometimes, but it was well worth it in the long run. Yeah, Terry.
One of the things I think about is I don't know if we used the illustration years ago, but it's like shaping a tree, how easy it is to bend it when they're small.
Yeah.
And the rougher, the larger they get, the bigger they get, the harder that is. And the other thing that I think about it is like we need to teach them that, they need to be considering the authority of somebody else, because when they get old enough and they're studying the scriptures for themselves, that they need to bend and obey God. That's all the groundwork's all laid back over here. Teaching them is, I gotta bend and listen and obey. And that bends over here, again, you get older or we fail to do that, then they're gonna have this, why would I pick this Bible up and God's telling me to do something I'm not care about, So it's just like, we need to do that.
I like that analogy. I hadn't thought about that, but you can bend a plant very easily when it's very young and tender, and you can't when it gets older and has the whole trunk and bark and the wood and all that. You can't do much with it, Ed.
Another thing, a practical thing with raising kids is, are your neighbors or your friends happy to see you come?
Yeah.
They just as soon maybe you leave early or something. Kids can they will test you, especially when you take them somewhere to visit.
Yes, I would agree with that there are certain situations in which the children are going to see, do I have to obey you in this situation? When it's more complicated. And I think we must be consistent. And I didn't discipline my children in front of someone, but I'd take them where I could and do it when they needed it. Because if they get by with it in the store or, in somebody else's house or, when we're really busy and, if there's certain situations that the discipline doesn't happen, then it really ruins the effect of the discipline. It's hard. It's hard to discipline well. Yes, Penny.
I hope I can word this the way it is in my brain, but, I know for me, when we were raising our kids, I had to always remember that discipline isn't just punishment, that it's training.
Yes.
Because so many times I would think, oh, it just seems so mean to punish them for that. Like, they're just being a child. They don't know any different. But then
Yes, yeah, good point. That's exactly right. You know, we want them to be shaped and molded after God's image, and we've got to work on that. And so we're doing it for their benefit, you know. And I think seeing that and recognizing the value the discipline has in their life, then we're going to need to apply the discipline even though it's not fun. Somebody had a hand up, I thought. Yeah, Jared.
The second part of that, not setting your heart on his destruction, you think that's where you're, like you said, looking, basically it's selfishness. I don't want to take the time, it's inconvenient, it's not, doesn't seem to be helping any. You think that's what that?
I think probably so, yeah. Yeah, because it's hard to discipline well, and sometimes we'd rather leave it off. Even though we know it would benefit the child, it's going to cramp our style. It's going to make it inconvenient and uncomfortable for us. Yeah, I think so. Good thought. Other comments? 22:6.
Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it.
So this is a famous proverb and often debated in terms of, is it flexible? Is it always true in every case that you train up the child the way you should and they'll stay with it? And I think no more than any of these other proverbs are always true. They're truisms. They're typically true. He's not saying that you can avoid a child's free will. You train them up right and their free will has nothing to do with it. It's not saying that. And God has had plenty of children of his own that he's treated properly and they've abandoned him. And so, but it is saying our training has a big impact on the children. I mean, that is very true. And training them up in the way they should go is the right thing to do. You see plenty of families where there's several children who've done well and one or two that haven't, and same parents, same discipline, same everything. So it obviously, you know, the child's will, especially as they become an adult, is a factor in this. But it's a good thing to raise them up well. Austin?
And as much as showing them the right way to do something, we can unintentionally be a bad example for our children by not doing something.
Yes.
You know, just avoiding it back to the discipline side. But I just think, how many habits do I form by not showing them something?
Yes, good point. And have you noticed how much of this is addressed to his son? Go back to chapter 3, 3:1, my son, do not forget my teaching. And 3:11, my son, do not reject. And I think 3:20 something, right? 3:21, my son. And you can go through a lot of this. And it's his son, his son, his son. Why is he teaching it to his son? Because he's concerned that the son learn and understand these principles of wisdom. So there's more to this than just giving a good spanking. You know, that's sometimes a part of the discipline process. But we're trying to train them to understand God and his will, so we're educating our children in the ways of God, in the ways of wisdom. And we're teaching. You know, we should not think that our relationship with our children is mostly discipline. That's a big factor. But it's mostly training them up in the ways of God and teaching them and guiding them and modeling for them what it's like to be a godly person. That's so important. We can't just, we just kind of assume we're going to bring them to church and they'll just understand that. But that needs to be something we're constantly training and teaching and discussing and guiding them in their thinking on those things. Thoughts? Let's think about 22:15.
Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from him.
Yeah. He's not going to improve by being left to himself. There's going to have to be some discipline to remove that foolishness from him. You know, every child has some foolishness. Every person does. And so there's going to have to be some discipline of some sort in your relationship with them. Guide and shape and mold them. 23:13 and 14.
Do not hold back discipline from the child, although you strike him with the rod, he will not die. You shall strike him with the rod and rescue his soul from Sheol.
So you don't hold back the discipline because uncorrected children lead to undisciplined adults, and it's bad. It's going to be negative for them. So you realize, the mind of the child will be filled with something you want to try to discipline his mind and his actions and guide him in the right direction. This is not to vent our anger. We are not disciplining because we're just frustrated. We're fed up. I finally had enough. You see parents doing that. And what have they taught? They've taught, well, sometimes dad's in a bad mood. If that's what this is, it's not going to teach them anything that's valuable. It needs to be that we discipline them always for their good, never for our frustration. I was just talking to a father of a 3-year-old in Brazil yesterday. He said he gets angry with him, and he knows that's not right, and asking for help on how to fix that, so forth. We talked a lot about these ideas of disciplining for the good of the child, not because we're upset, not because I'm mad at you. In fact, we love them. This is the fruit of our love. We want to discipline them so that they will learn to respect authority and learn to do the right things, not because we're, put out with them because they didn't do what we said again. And it makes a difference. Loving discipline for the benefit of the child does not feel the same to the child as, me just blowing my top. Thoughts? Terry?
They know, children know when the punishment's been overdone.
Yes.
They don't think about that, but they do. They know that. There was a celebrity panel one time back when, I don't know how many of you may remember Dr. Spock that wrote that about, about the don't discipline your kid type thing, and they were doing that, and they were discussing that on TV. And I remember what Sinbad said. His dad, he was on the panel of guys that were given the whipping the kids, and the others were just, no, don't do that. And he said he'd like to add timeout. His dad would give him timeout instead of whipping him. But he said, it come down, he said, I'm telling you, he said, we were out one night to steal a car. And he was with 2 of his other buddies, and they were down there to steal a car, and they were ready to get there and steal the car. He said he got to thinking about dad and his punishment, what would happen to him when his dad found out if they got caught. He decided he wasn't going to go out. He wasn't going to steal the car with the other guy. And that stuck with me. I've never forgot that. That was so odd at that time for people to punish their kids like that.
Yeah, so we're trying to come up with punishment that's appropriate to our children, their nature, their age, their respectfulness, and so forth. I'm not sure that there's one form that works in every situation. We have to understand our children and do what's best for them, but we're always doing it for what they need, for what's best for them, because we love them. It's never venting our spleen. It's never, I'm just so mad at you, you just messed everything up, and I can't stand you. No. Any discipline like that is not discipline. That's just a parent giving vent to his anger and wrath, and it's terrible. Dawn?
And you have to have a relationship with your child. Like, you need to have some good enough relationship, and if they care about you and anything, that they don't even want to disappoint you. That they love you too, and you go, oh, I don't want to do that because I don't want to disappoint my parents.
So I've thought about this. Some of this is subjective. You don't have to accept what I'm saying. Just think about it. But why is spanking, let's say, I spanked with my hand. Why is spanking deterrent to their wrong actions? I don't think it's because I spanked them hard enough that they hurt so bad they didn't want to hurt like that again. It was the symbolism of it. It was what it meant. They didn't want to disappoint me like that. I don't think it was ever, I spanked them so hard that, man, they didn't want to be bruised like that again or anything like that. That's child abuse. That's not helping our children. But it is the symbolism of it. It's what it means. It's the disappointment of the parent saying this was not the right thing for you to do. And so if you're doing that, always thinking what's best for the child, it'll be so much different. And it'll be loving. You're not happy that the child did wrong, but you love the child, and that's why you're not just giving up on them and not just saying, well, forget it. I'm sick and tired of dealing with you. It's not like that. I'm never going to be sick and tired of dealing with you. I always love you, and I always do everything I can to help you be what you ought to be. That may change as they get older. I'm not sure I need to be spanking my adolescent or something like that, but if there's punishment that's needed, it needs to be punishment that's appropriate for the situation. Other thoughts? Terry?
Well, one of the things I remember is that we could talk to Adam, and he would just, it would crush him, because you had to wear Monica out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know the feeling. Yes. Jared?
I was just thinking about the impact, right? It's not just so that they're going to act right or be good in public, but you're going to save their soul.
Yes.
Teaching them to respect authority. Yours, our authority, our parent authority right now, but as they get older, will be, the laws, the police, and ultimately God. It's that respect for the authority, and if they don't respect your authority, then they're going to grow up and not respect any authority.
Good point. Yeah, that's exactly right. Ed?
I think that every parent should have to drive a school bus 1 year. That should be a requirement.
Yeah. Well, that would certainly show you different parenting styles. Yes. Matt?
Just going through these, and I myself will admit I need to do a much better job about this, but I think if you start from the starting point of don't put your hand in the dog's dish because it might bite you, like that's just common sense. And so I'm not going to get upset with the dog if I do something foolish or do something wrong around him. So it seems like going through these, if I start at the starting point, that children have foolishness in them.
Yeah.
And it's not their fault. They're children. They're ignorant. They don't have wisdom yet. So start with the starting point of they have foolishness in them. So don't get mad about that. Steer them from that.
Right.
That's what we need to try and do. Just don't get, and again, I need to work on that a lot, but don't get frustrated at what they are at that stage.
Well said. Amen. I totally agree. I think that's exactly what we're saying. Yeah, we're not, this is not, calming us down because we beat them up. It's not at all like that. It's, I'm training them, I'm guiding them, I'm helping them. I love them. I want them to respect authority. I want them to do the right thing. I want them to learn principles of wisdom that'll help them. And to do that, I know that discipline is a part of it. Look at 29:15.
The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child who gets his own way brings shame to his mother.
So the rod and reproof. But the idea is the child gets his own way, then they'll bring shame to his mother. Look at 17. Correct your son and he will give you comfort. He will also delight your soul. Think about Adonijah in 2 Kings 1, 1 Kings 1. That David had never crossed him. David always just let him do whatever he wanted to. Well, he did. And look what happened. It was a terrible situation. No boundaries were imposed. Either the child's will or the parent's heart will be broken, one of the two. And, we need to really think about that and realize that, just letting them do what they want to that's not loving them. That's not doing what's best for them. Comments? Dawn.
My dad telling us, you're going to have to say no a lot, so don't say no unless you have to. But if you say no, then it is no. Do not let it happen.
Right.
You just can't say no, don't do that, no, do that, don't do that, and then let them do it.
Yes.
That doesn't work.
It's a good idea to limit the number of things that are prohibited because it can get so complicated nobody can remember what's prohibited. So trying to do your training with a limited number of things, limited number of situations is, I think, helpful. I remember, I may have used this illustration, but Vernon McKee, I spent one summer with Aud McKee. Those who know him, knew him, but he was a good guy, a good preacher, and I trained with him for 3 months. And Verna had raised 4 sons. She's told me, I don't know how many times, she said, I always told them, I'm not spanking you so I'll love you. I'll always love you. I'm spanking you so that other people will love you. I think there's something to be said for that. We're spanking them because we want them to have influence on others, we want them to do the right thing, please God, and be helpful to other people. So we're doing it for their benefit, for the benefit of those that will be around them eventually. And then look at 19:27.
Cease listening, my son, to discipline, and you will stray from the words of knowledge.
The son needs to listen to the words of discipline, to the wisdom. That's something that as the son gets older, he needs to take some responsibility in this. This is not just for parents. Sons need to be living disciplined lives. They need to take advantage of the discipline their parents gave them and be disciplined people. You know, if I'm a kind of adult that's always blaming my misbehavior on my parents, hey, it's too late on that. You know, you're responsible for what you do. Yeah, Austin.
I think to that end, it can be really discouraging as a parent to not have a child listen to you at any age. But certainly at an older age, we need to not take it personally as parents and know that that's maybe a station that they're in their life and a time I can remember being that kid and looking back now, reflecting on that of my parents meant well, even though I thought they were really idiots on every level. And so I can remember one of my parents in particular getting really offended and not talking to me for many, many years about anything anymore. So we went from a relationship where I thought they were dumb because they were trying to correct and discipline to no relationship. And so as parents, but probably more so dads, don't be so offended when your kid thinks you're an idiot. Keep talking, keep structure, because they will circle back around as you build that relationship and be reminded that you were meaning well.
Right. Yeah, good point. Yeah, I agree. Other thoughts? So 10:13.
On the lips of the discerning, wisdom is found, but a rod is for the lack of intellect of the king.
Because sometimes they'll only learn that way. You know, that's part of the discipline process that's necessary for some children is physical discipline. And so that's for the appropriate place for that rod is the back of the child who doesn't have understanding. 12:1.
Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates reproof is stupid.
You might think about this in connection with the children. They need to see that they need discipline, that discipline is a blessing to them. It may not be pleasant, but if you hate reproof, I don't want anybody ever telling me what to do. I don't want them telling me I'm wrong. Well, you don't learn. We need that. We can teach our children. It's important that you listen to words of correction. You're not always right. You're young, you haven't experienced a lot of things, and you need the reproof. You know, to just shut our ears and kind of close ourselves off to listening to words of wisdom and discipline is so foolish. And certainly all of us need that. We need the words of wisdom and discipline from the Lord and to realize, wow, we need him. Austin.
There's a sense that this is also the foolish person will want the consequences to what Matt was saying. You know, the dog is eating, you're going to stick your hand in there. A foolish person still sticks their hand. I don't know how many times I've been at a Mexican restaurant and they set the plate down that's sizzling and they tell me it's hot, and I still think I need to move it to where I want to move it and burn my fingers. We are foolish in that, and the consequence is I go, oh yeah, they were kidding. It is. Well, that's not a good behavior. I'm not excited that I do that. We need to listen and heed that warning instead of being the foolish person that wants to take the consequence. We want to get the traffic ticket. We want to do whatever, fill in the blank for you. I'm a fool in that way. It's not about getting discipline from a parent. It's about, I'll accept that consequence for my foolish behavior.
Yeah, good thoughts. All right, we'll continue this on Sunday, Lord willing.
Good evening. I had forgotten this last Sunday, until I saw the news, that it was December 7th. And at least folks of my generation still remember December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy. I still remember all that. We really, as a kid, I was really into like World War II stuff. My dad flew model airplanes, and he would build like scale airplanes from that era. And so, being with him all the time, I wanted to be in his workshop, so he had books on World War II airplanes. And so, anyways, I'm kind of connected to that in that way. And I heard on the news that there are only 12 survivors still from the Pearl Harbor disaster. And each of those 12 men are over 100 years old now. And thinking about, how much we treasure those soldiers and the combatants and then the nurses and all the people that were involved in that. And think about how many books and movies and documentaries have been produced based on their eyewitness accounts about how much we treasure what they went through, the courage and the stories that they have to tell about how that shaped their lives. And how then, that shapes us in the future and the decisions we make. And as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about Luke, as he wrote the gospel. Remember what he focused on. So in Luke chapter 1, the first 4 verses, he shares, "Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile an account of the things accomplished among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who, from the beginning, were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. It seemed fitting for me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write it out for you in consecutive order, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the exact truth of the things that you have been taught." Luke treasured these eyewitnesses similarly to how we treasure these people that have gone through these situations that have changed their lives and changed history. And Luke, likewise, I can just imagine him, as he traveled around in that land with Paul, he was thinking like, I want to meet these people. He says he met with eyewitnesses and he investigated these things. Luke's account was written some decades after these events. What eyewitnesses was he talking to? Who was still around? It kind of got me thinking, like, who in Luke's gospel could he have talked to that was an eyewitness? Now, he doesn't tell us who these people were he talked to. But there are some stories in this book about children that had an encounter with Jesus. And also, when we think about us, when I think about myself, I had a direct relationship with my grandfather who fought, in Germany. And he was in Belgium. And I remember being in the room when he would tell me these stories. And I can remember the words he used and the way he had books and had pamphlets and training materials still from the war that he gave to me that I remember reading that. And I'm sure you've had a similar situation with family or a loved one who you can go back in your mind and you can recall what they told you, even some decades later. Well, these people are also sharing the same with Luke. Think about Luke chapter 8. Luke reads a time when a man had a young daughter who was very sick. In verse 41, there was a man named Jairus, and he was an official of the synagogue. And he fell at Jesus' feet and began to implore him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years old, and she was dying. But as he went, the crowds were pressing against him. If we jump to verse 49, while he was still speaking, someone came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, your daughter has died. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." But when Jesus heard this, he answered him, "Do not be afraid any longer. Only believe, and she will be made well." When he came to the house, he did not allow anyone to enter with him, except Peter and John and James and the girl's father and mother. Now all were weeping and lamenting for her, but he said, "Stop weeping, for she's not died, but is asleep." And they began laughing at him, knowing that she had died. However, he took her by the hand and called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up immediately. And he gave orders for something to be given her to eat. And her parents were amazed. This young lady was 12 years old when this happened. We think some decades later, she would still be alive, most likely when Luke was writing his gospel. Could it be that Luke got to talk to Jairus' daughter? That would be something. And think about the stories that family told about, if she didn't remember every detail because she wasn't conscious for a time during this, but the family is telling her, "Oh, remember when this happened? Remember when this happened?" And they're telling their friends and they're telling their family, and this story starts spreading, and it becomes like family lore, this legend of their family, this special event that they happen to have with Jesus. And that would be burned into their memories for a long time. And perhaps Luke got to talk to Jairus' daughter or one of Jairus' family members to get the details of the story that he is now sharing with us. Luke chapter 9, verse 37. Another story about a young person here. On the next day, when they came down from the mountain, a large crowd met him. And a man from the crowd shouted, saying, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only boy. And a spirit seizes him and suddenly screams and throws him into the convulsion, into a foaming at the mouth, and only with difficulty does it leave him, mauling him as he leaves. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not." And Jesus answered and said, "You unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." While he was still approaching, the demon slammed him to the ground and threw him into a convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit and healed the boy and gave him back to his father. They were all amazed at the greatness of God. I don't know how young this boy was, but if this spirit is throwing him into convulsions and he's hitting the ground hard, he might be striking rocks or striking a wall. If he's being thrown into a fire, this boy may grow up with these scars and these reminders on his body about what that demon was doing to him. And he's going to also remember that encounter with Jesus when he was made well. And he still has those scars. And could it be that Luke might have met this young man who was still living when Luke was writing his gospel, and he could see those scars, and that boy could tell him about that time that Jesus healed me from that demon? Again, these are assumptions. This is not what I'm saying really happened. But Luke was talking to eyewitnesses. He says that. He was talking to eyewitnesses. And he was talking to eyewitnesses, families, people that had known these stories. Just like we treasure the stories of our veterans, and we remember them in our hearts, these eyewitnesses had those memories burned into their hearts too. And that's what we get to read today. Luke's gospel is a compilation of all those eyewitness stories that people had burned into their hearts about their experience with Jesus. That was really the message I wanted to say tonight. Is when we look at the Gospels, it's not a compilation of moral stories. Luke especially was a compilation of eyewitness accounts, just like the eyewitness accounts that we have in our own lives with our own families or our own selves, and we retell to others. Luke took those true stories, compiled into a book for us. And if this book is as true as we trust it to be because of those eyewitness accounts, then we must do what that book tells us to do. and the things that Jesus calls us to be and to do. We need to take heart and follow those as well. So if this has moved you to trust in the gospel more and to really understand that what Jesus has said is true and I must follow Jesus, we welcome you to come forward as we stand and sing our invitation song.
Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for this night. We get to come here and learn more about you. We ask that those who are sick or shut in or not able to make it out tonight, please encourage them. We also ask that with this upcoming weather, you keep us safe wherever we're traveling. As we leave here tonight and we go into our lives, help encourage us and remember who you are and how you want us to be. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.